Hello, it's Paul Beckwith, and we've got Newton today as a making a guest appearance. Whoa, big yawn, doggy breath. So in this video, I want to talk all about global biodiversity and how we have a huge problem with abrupt climate system change, changing weather patterns, changing, mostly weather variability, extremes of temperature, torrential rains in some places where it never used to be, flooding, all of these different things. And also climate change, is creating this warmer world with less biodiversity, which means that we're getting an acceleration of what biologists and epidemiologists call viral spillovers, which are spillovers from one species to another species of viruses, and then that leads to mutations, and that causes things like the coronavirus. So anyway, if he cooperates with me, I'll get right into this video. I'm just getting over a stomach flu, which I've forgotten how bad they are. I've been in very good health for the duration of this pandemic, but until about a month ago, and then I got COVID and I tested positive for 10 days. Felt pretty crappy, but not too bad. And then about a week and a half later, came down with this stomach flu, and it's been awful for the last couple of days, but I'm feeling better now. But I lost probably 3, 4, 5 pounds as a result of this stomach flu thing. So anyway, on the mend, so hopefully it continues. Okay, so this is one of the papers, one of the articles on the climate change will accelerating viral spillovers, but I think I'll start here. So here we have a National Geographic article. There's a sea turtle, and mass extinction in the oceans can be avoided by curbing fossil fuels is the title. If it's not slowed, climate change could lead to marine losses unlike anything Earth has seen in 252 million years since the last major extinction. So there was a new paper that came out. It talks about the end of the Permian period, 252 million years ago. There was a single supercontinent dominating the planet. The ocean around it was traversed by bony fish covered in armored plates and sea scorpions the size of modern humans. Okay, so it was quite a different world, but these creatures are only known from the fossil record. So at the end of the Permian, 90% of all marine life was wiped out by the largest extinction event in Earth's history. It was caused likely by massive releases of CO2, probably from volcanic activity in a region called the Siberian Traps. The most common cause of death, according to a paper in 2018, was likely physiological stress from warming seas and ocean loss, oxygen loss rather, a byproduct of the climate change caused by greenhouse gases. Now, there was a new paper that was just published, and I'll show you a little bit about it. If our own greenhouse gas emissions continue unchecked, warming waters and oxygen loss at sea could by themselves lead to a mass extinction event, rivaling the planet's 5 worst mass extinction events. It could be significant enough to erase much of the species diversification that has occurred since the end Cretaceous extinction that killed the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. So when there's a mass extinction event, you get a huge loss of species diversity, and then evolution after that takes an awful long time to build it back up. So what we're doing with our abrupt climate system change is causing a similar mass extinction. But of course, there's always a but, right, that they put in, whether it's valid or not. We can alter this trajectory. Curbing emissions rapidly could reduce extinction risks by 70%, they say. Okay, so if we turn around our emissions quickly, we could still lose something like 5% of marine species. At 2 degrees Celsius of warming, you see a 10% loss. But they're saying there would be a change in the overall community of species, but we'd be avoiding a mass extinction. Okay, so this was an important study, and it's warmer temperatures, so there's more stratification or layering of the ocean, so there's less mixing, so nutrients don't go from deep down to the surface, and there's less oxygen going from the surface downward. Okay, so these low oxygen zones in the ocean are expanding rapidly but unevenly, pushing much of marine life to an ever narrower band of oxygen-rich water near the surface. These deoxygenated regions, from the Bay of Bengal near India to a stretch of the Atlantic off West Africa to large regions of the Eastern Pacific, have grown by nearly 1.7 million square miles since the 60s and are pushing upward as much as 3 feet per year. Okay, so in other words, you need to be, there's a certain depth at which there's decent oxygen that supports life in the ocean, and that depth is shallowing 3 feet per year. Off Southern California, 650 feet below the surface, oxygen has dropped nearly a third in some places in the past 25 years. Areas of the sea completely devoid of oxygen have increased fourfold since the middle of the last century. Okay, so we know about coastal dead zones. These are low oxygen zones that are a result of nutrient pollution, but these ones in the ocean, mid-ocean, are not. They're driven by rising temperatures. Surface waters are warming. They absorb less dissolved oxygen from the air above. Also, the warm water is lighter than the cold water below, so it reduces ocean mixing, vertical mixing. So less oxygen goes deep down, less nutrients come to the surface. So there's, basically, many different creatures like crabs and squid, for example, struggle to see in low oxygen conditions. Okay, many tiny zooplankton, which are little marine creatures that eat the phytoplankton, and they're eaten by larger creatures in the sea. They already live at the very limits of their oxygen threshold, won't likely survive more decreases without moving to new places. Low oxygen is reducing reproduction for some fish and increasing disease in others. Respiration is the most significant change. The warmer it gets, the more oxygen creatures require to sustain their energy demands. But that's happening as the oxygen supply in the ocean is being reduced. So it's very, very disturbing. Lots of very dire things coming out of this. Tropical species are more likely to survive because as warm hypoxic conditions become globally widespread, these species have already adapted to these types of environments. It's the cold, high oxygen species that have nowhere to go to seek refuge. Okay, so the polar creatures are at greater risk, actually. So there's a new study. I'm still trying to get a hold of the peer-reviewed copy of this study. It's behind a paywall that I haven't been able to get through, but there was another article here in a group called H2O Radio, which talks about that article. Climate change could lead to mass extinction in the oceans. And they showed the big 5 extinctions here. Late Ordovician, about 450 million years ago. The late Devonian, 380 million years ago or so. the end Permian. This is a biggie that we've just been talking about, 252 million years ago. The end Triassic here, and the end Cretaceous 65 million years ago. So you can see, you know, these are the percentage of extinctions overall. This is mostly focusing on the ocean. And here's our CO2 emissions, historical, you know, high CO2 emissions. Here's what we've been doing. You know, are we in the sixth extinction? Many people are saying that we are. So we're still going to get up to, we're getting more and more extinctions as we continue to pump out greenhouse gases. There's strong sentiment among the public that it's too late to avoid this extinction, but that's not what the results show, according to one of the study's authors. If we limited global warming to 2 degrees C, the severity of extinctions would be lowered by more than 70%. Okay, but that's not happening. We're hitting these extinctions. Okay, so this is the article which I tried to get access to, but I haven't succeeded yet. If anybody has access to it themselves, please, you know, go on Twitter and message me a copy of it, and then I would do a separate video on this one paper itself. What it's showing, basically what it's showing is global warming is threatening marine life with losses of unknown severity. So with accelerating greenhouse gas emissions, species losses from ocean warming and oxygen depletion alone become comparable to direct human impacts within a century and culminate in a mass extinction rivaling those in the Earth's past. Polar species are at the highest risk of extinction, okay, because the Arctic is warming much, much faster than the rest of the planet, and that includes the ocean waters. Local biological richness declines more in the tropics. Okay, so polar species are more likely to go extinct, but the biological richness, the diversity of species, is going to decrease more in the tropics because it's much, much higher to begin with. Reversing greenhouse gas emission trends would diminish extinction risk by more than 70%. Preserving the marine biodiversity that's accumulated over the past 50 million years of evolutionary history. Okay, so since the last mass extinction, there's been a huge growth in biological diversity, both in the atmosphere and oceans. And this present abrupt climate system change, extinction of species, is undoing that and will take us back to there. Now, I had a look at the oceans on Twitter to see what was being said. And there's lots of information on the ocean losing, you know, losing its biodiversity. Lots of different things going across. Just to find it, I find it a very useful way to search the hashtags on Twitter. Searching for biodiversity, loads and loads of stuff there. Too much to cover completely, but I'm going to go into some specifics. Okay, so this article just came out on Inside Climate News. Apocalypse Papers, scientists call for paradigm shift as biodiversity loss worsens. Okay, so a couple weeks ago, there was a study by scientists from the US and Europe. They warned that climate change was on track to push more than half of the world's species of cactus. Now, cactus is a plant known for its extraordinary ability to survive heat and drought. But they're being pushed into extinction by mid-century, okay, the cactus. So this scientist, says he has a whole folder. He calls them apocalypse papers. And then, oh, here's another one. We pass them around every day like, oh, here's another one. You know, goes in the pile. Cactus in this case. We need an immediate paradigm shift in the way humans travel, produce energy, grow our food, and consume goods. Such a shift is not only necessary to tackle climate change, but it's critical to mitigating the threat of mass extinction as a rapidly increasing number of species of plants and animals face the loss of losing their natural habitats to inhospitable heat and the growing footprint of human industry and agriculture. Think of the plants and animals in India and Pakistan where those heat waves are going on. We never hear about them. You know, we hear about the huge impacts, the terrible impacts to people living there, but not to the plants and animals there. You know, we hear about grain crops that can't grow, but what about the trees and bushes and shrubs and other plants there? And then there was another study just last week about the world insects in dramatic decline in both population and diversity due to the combination of climate change and expanding agriculture. In some areas, overall insect populations dropped nearly in half, with more than a quarter fewer species. And then after that, there was, in a first of its kind study, there were researchers declared that more than 1 in 5 species of reptiles, including chameleons, Komodo dragons, and king cobras, are now at risk of extinction as humans continue to take away their habitat for farming, urban development, and other industry. Then after that, another study warned that the climate crisis is pushing the Earth's oceans towards a mass extinction event at a level not seen in about 250 million years, when scientists believe up to 90% of marine organisms went extinct due to overheated, acidic, and deoxygenated oceans. Okay, so human activity, you know, the greenhouse gas emissions and our encroachment on the Earth is causing animals and plants to go extinct at a huge rate, probably in a new mass extinction. A sweeping new report from the UN found that more than 70% of the Earth's land has already been altered by human activity, primarily because of expanding agriculture. The World Resources Institute found that the world is losing 10 soccer fields worth of tropical forest per minute because of development and industry. There's a huge disconnect between what climate science says must be done to avoid catastrophic warming and mass extinctions and the action world leaders are actually taking to address the issues. That disconnect is what is pushing many scientists, including Curry, to take up activism in recent years, departing from the traditional role as a neutral information provider to call for specific policies, including endorsing a rapid transition from fossil fuels and a major restructuring of the world's food systems. Earlier, last month, more than 1,000 scientists from around the world staged demonstrations and faced arrest for civil disobedience as a way to decry a lack of action to address the climate crisis. Okay, in a tragic scene last week, in what is believed to be a protest on climate inaction, a U.S. climate activist lit himself on fire in front of the Supreme Court and later died from his injury. And this was a scientist or an activist practicing Buddhism, and he took that extreme measure. Here's the article on climate change linked to fewer bugs. Okay, fewer insect populations. Here is a Chinese farmer who's pollinating a pear tree by hand in China. Heavy use of pesticides on fruit trees caused a severe decline in wild bee populations. So trees have to be pollinated by hand to produce fruit. So again, it's a combination of climate change and heavy agriculture that's having a profound impact on the abundance and diversity of insects. In areas where substantial warming has been documented and where land has been converted for intensive agriculture, meaning it involves monoculture and the use of pesticides, insects were nearly 50% less abundant. More than a quarter fewer species could be found. So there's an alarming decline of insect populations. I bought a book recently called The Insect Apocalypse, which I'll read soon, and I'll probably do a separate video on that. Data collected around the globe in 264 previously published biodiversity studies included nearly 18,000 species, including bees, beetles, grasshoppers, and butterflies. More than 750,000 data points are included in the study. So they're measuring across many insect species over time. The argument is the world loses 1% to 2% of its insects every year. Okay, there's been many studies on climate change and insect loss. This recent study is one of the largest and most quantitative. It's global in scope. But we do need more data from the southern hemisphere and from tropical regions. Tropical regions are the cradle for the tree of life. 80% of all animals and plants are in the tropics, and they're being hit extremely hard. The new research shows that tropical regions were among those most at risk for heavy losses. You know, and insects play a critical and often understated role in ecosystems. They're a source of food for many other creatures, and they help decompose organic waste and pollinate plants. Insects kind of tether everything together. If you remove the insects from the planet, basically life as we know it would grind to a halt. We would not have as much soil manufactured. There'd be no bird life. There'd be very little food production on the land. We'd lose many of our fruits and vegetables. Okay, so, and it goes on. Scientists have been ringing the bell on insects for more than a decade with concerns about the pace at which the world is losing insects. Landmark studies have documented dramatic declines, particularly in Europe. There's some studies that were done in Germany. The data is rock solid. We have a real problem here with insect loss. And then, you know, this article here is all about insect agriculture and climate change are reshaping insect biodiversity worldwide. This article was published April 20th, this year. And they look at the interaction between, you know, with historical climate warming, intensive agriculture use. We've lost almost 50% in the abundance, that's in the number of insects, and 27% in the number of species within insect assemblages relative to those in less disturbed habits with lower rates of historical climate warming. These patterns are particularly evident in the tropical realm, whereas some positive responses of biodiversity to climate change occur in non-tropical regions in natural habitats. If there's a lot of nearby natural habitat, that can mitigate reductions in insect abundance and richness associated with agricultural land use, because species can actually move slowly, substantial climate warming, but only in low-intensity agricultural systems. In systems in which high levels of natural habitat are available, abundance and richness were reduced by 7% and 5%, compared with reductions of 63% and 61% in places where less natural habitat is present, only 25% coverage. Okay, so insects, we have a huge problem with insects. This is an article which I can't access, but it's about the reptiles, king cobras to geckos. 20% of reptiles face extinction. This article is about the world losing 10 soccer fields equivalent of tropical forests per minute. Annual forest loss data from the World Resources Institute shows nations lagging far below their 2030 pledges. Tropical deforestation drives more than 7% of global carbon dioxide emissions, about the same share as the entire population of India. Okay, so the world is losing tropical forests in 2021 at a rate of about 10 soccer pitches per minute. Last year saw a global loss of 3.8 million hectares, or 14,286 square miles of tropical forest. So the World Resources Institute, they have this global forest watch, and they track these sort of things. And then it goes into the rates of where they're occurring. Okay, so this is the Global Forest Review, Forest Pulse, the latest on the world's forests. How much forest was lost in 2021? Okay, forest loss remained stubbornly high in 2021. The tropics lost 11.1 million hectares of tree cover in 2021. Of particular concern are the 3.75 million hectares of loss that occurred within primary tropical rainforests. They're areas of critical importance for carbon storage and biodiversity, equivalent to a rate of 10 football pitches per minute. Tropical primary forest loss in 2021 resulted in 2.5 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions, equivalent to the annual fossil fuel emissions of India. So this is forest loss from 2002 to 2021, and you can see there is fluctuation. 2016 was a very bad year because there was a huge amount of fire loss. You know, the fire loss is the brown on top, and you can see that it generally increasing over time. These are the top 10 countries for tropical primary forest loss in 2021. So Brazil, huge problem in Brazil. The Congo next, Bolivia here, Indonesia, Peru, and so on. Okay, so these are the top 10 countries for tropical primary forest loss in 2021. Indonesia has reduced primary forest loss for the 5th straight year. Okay, so it's heading in the right direction. Still lots of fires. Lots of fires here, but they've lower in the last few years. Brazil primary loss still going way up. Going in the wrong direction. And this is a breakdown of Brazil. So these are primary forest loss hotspots, 2002 to 2021. So intensifying hotspot to the red, new or dark red or brown, new hotspots are the bright red, sporadic and persistent hotspots. So lots of forest being lost in the Amazon rainforest still. You can see this is large-scale clearing. These slides compare October 2021 to October 2020. So look at all these regions that are being clear-cut, probably for palm oil plantations for agricultural production. Bolivia loss. Okay, and it goes into all of the details of forest loss. Okay, so anyway, it's a good resource. Climate change, by reducing biodiversity, is also accelerating viral spillovers. So in a warming world, bats in Southeast Asia would be especially prone to spreading viruses to other mammals, research has found. So viruses crossing from one species to another. So this is an infectious diseases research team that are catching bats outside this cave in Thailand, and they're measuring the viruses that are in those bats. So over the next 50 years, climate change will drive thousands of viruses to jump from one species of mammal to another, according to this study published in Nature late April. Okay, this is April 28, 2022, this article, so a few days before this was published. Before this date, this study was published. The shuffling of viruses among animals may increase the risk that one will jump into humans and cause a new pandemic. So a warming planet may increase the burden of diseases. Malaria, for example, is expected to spread as the mosquitoes that carry it expand their range into warming regions. But climate change might also usher in entirely new diseases by allowing pathogens to move into new host species. So we know that the species are moving to different places, they're interacting with new species, and when they do, they're going to have a chance to share the viruses that they're carrying. So they built this study. They built a computer model of to look at the potential spillovers in a warming world from viruses from one mammal to another mammal. They projected how thousands of mammals might shift their ranges of habitat as the climate changes between now and 2070. So as temperature increases, many species are expected to spread away from the blazing equator to find more comfortable habitat. So species are generally migrating towards the poles. Others may move up the sides of hills and mountains to find cooler altitudes. When different species come into contact for the first time, the viruses may be able to infect new hosts. To understand the odds of a successful new infection, the researchers began by building a database of viruses and their mammalian hosts. Some viruses have been found in more than one species of mammal, which means they must have jumped the species barrier at some point in the past, right? If you find the same virus in two different mammals, well, they probably developed in one and then made the species jump the species, so-called species barrier, to another one. So they used machine learning to predict whether two host species could share a virus, and they found that the more two species overlap geographically, the more likely they will share a virus. That only makes perfect sense. That's because the hosts were more likely to encounter each other, giving their viruses more opportunity to move between them. Also, closely related species were more likely to share a virus than were distant relatives because, closely related mammals are similar in their body biochemistry. A virus that's adapted to exploit one species is more likely to thrive in a relative. It may also be able to evade an immune system similar to one it's already adapted to. Okay, so they looked at 3,139 species. They anticipated more than 4,000 instances in which viruses would move from one species to another. In some cases, just one virus will make the jump, but there's also cases where multiple viruses carried by one species would spread to the other. The researchers were not able to say exactly which viruses would move between which species. What matters is the sheer scale of what's to come. It's a game of probabilities and statistics and likelihoods. When you're trying to predict the weather, you don't predict individual raindrops. You predict the clouds themselves. So looking at the big picture of overall of species and species jumps. This is an important study. It's quite novel. Previous studies focused on single viruses as opposed to surveying the entire world. So bats in Southeast Asia will be especially prone to these transmissions. As of now, many bat species in that region are limited to small ranges and don't come into contact with each other much, other species. But as the planet warms, these bats will fly quickly to suitable climates and encounter new species. So species overlap, probability of virus transmission is higher. These findings will be particularly ominous for humans. As viruses move to new host species, they evolve and could potentially evolve in ways that make them more likely to infect people. The coronavirus that caused SARS in 2002 originated in Chinese horseshoe bats and then jumped to another species, possibly raccoon dogs sold in Chinese animal markets before infecting people. In February, there were 2 new studies asserting that COVID arose through a similar sequence of events, with the coronavirus jumping from bats to wild mammals. We believe that is something that could happen a lot as a result of the interspecific transmission events that we're predicting. So when the researchers looked at the places mammals might end up in 2070, they found another reason to expect new human epidemics. They won't be migrating to wildlife refuges. It turns out that those are all the places we've built cities. A rare rodent that has little contact with humans today might pass a virus on to raccoons, which live comfortably in urban areas. This is opening up an entirely new pathway for this virus to spread into humans. Okay, so species spillovers are a huge potential problem. And this is another article. at least 15,000 new cross-species viral transmissions could happen by 2070. So it's just talking about the key findings. 15,000 new cross-species viral transmissions are forecast to happen by 2070, driven by climate change of 2 degrees Celsius. Okay, so this is so this is a huge problem. And this is the article in Nature, accelerated article preview. So this is a preview of the study. Okay, a PDF of the paper. It's been accepted, but it still needs to be, to undergo final peer review. At least 10,000 viral species have the capacity to infect humans, but at present the vast majority are circulating silently in wild mammals. However, climate and land use change will produce novel opportunities for viral sharing among previously geographically isolated species of wildlife. In some cases, this will facilitate zoonotic spillover, a mechanistic link between global environment change and disease emergence. So they simulate the potential hotspots of future viral sharing using a model that projects the geographic range shifts for 3,139 mammal species under climate change and land use scenarios for the year 2070. So they predict that species will aggravate in new combinations at high elevations in mountainous regions, in biodiversity hotspots, and in areas of high human population density in Asia and Africa, driving the novel cross-species transmission of their viruses an estimated 4,000 times. Because of their unique dispersal capacity, bats account for the majority of novel viral sharing and are likely to share viruses along evolutionary pathways that will facilitate future emergence in humans. Surprisingly, we find that this ecological transition may already be underway, and holding warming under 2 Celsius within the century will not reduce future viral sharing. So there's an urgent need to pair viral surveillance and discovery efforts with biodiversity surveys tracking species range shifts, especially in tropical regions that harbor the most zoonoses and are experiencing rapid warming. Okay, so I'm not going to go into all of the details of this article. Yeah, it's 50 pages. It's not loading properly here. Gotta try to reload it here. My computer seems very slow. Where are the figures gone? Yeah. Okay, well, anyway. Yeah, I can't... Okay, so this is open source. Climate change increases cross-species viral transmission risk. It was just published. It's not loading properly for me now. Yeah, okay. So you can have a look at it. Marine heat waves are, of course, a big problem. We're getting more and more marine heat waves, more and more, over 90% of the heating on the Earth is going on in the oceans, and it's causing huge problems for marine life. And there's also, so this looks at, the local drivers of marine heat waves, a global analysis from an Earth system model, a climate model, to look at these marine heat waves. How often do they occur? Where do they occur? And what what consequences do they have to marine life? So here's, here's sea surface temperature. This is a seasonal cycle that's normal. This is the 90th percentile of marine heat wave. And then there's, this is what was actually observed, and, the timing of it. Okay, so the timing of a marine heat wave, and here's some different comparison maps showing different magnitudes of warming. This is like probably a strong El Nino type event in these situations. Okay, so they look at all of the physics of these things and how often they occur and the drivers and where they occur. You know, they look at like surface heat flux, um, okay, vertical mixing, vertical diffusion, advection, which is horizontal motion. So they look at all the different factors as to why, you know, where the heat comes from in these certain regions in the ocean. And I could do a whole separate video on this, and I may eventually, I'm probably due for, you know, an ocean one. But, you know, I'm talking mostly about biodiversity in this video, and biodiversity, of course, in the oceans is greatly threatened by these marine heat waves. And also the ocean, the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, ocean current is at a critical transition point. It's possibly approaching a tipping point, and that will dramatically shift global weather patterns and have huge ramifications for biodiversity. And this is probably worth a whole separate video. But again, this will have a major impact on biodiversity. And there's some observation-based early warning signals for a collapse of the AMOC, which I will do a whole separate video on. And this, again, not only affects humans in a huge way, but affects the biodiversity around the planet also. Some good news, tropical forests can partially regenerate in just 20 years without human interference. So if they're left to their own, you know, then they can, secondary forests are like teenagers. They soak up carbon like crazy and they empty your fridge. So there you go. They can bounce back with surprising rapidity. A new study published today, well, this is the end of last year. Okay, so an interesting study about forests regenerating. Okay, so I think I'll end up here. I mean, basically, you know, we're quite human-centric, right? We think about climate change, abrupt climate change, heat waves, extreme weather events, droughts, torrential rains leading to floods other places, and we just think about how it affects human. But please remember to consider the impacts on the plants and the animals, and you know, sometimes they pop up in the news, but you know, we're losing biodiversity at an enormous rate. You know, we don't want this rock going through space, orbiting the sun that we call the Earth, to become a barren rock again. You know, we have to change the way we do things and you know, focus on human survival on this planet. So thank you for listening, and we'll chat again soon. Bye for now.